At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother, Eleanor, raised her champagne flute. She looked right at me, the only daughter in the family wearing a military uniform, and snarled, "You ungrateful child! You are a stain on this family. Get out!" The whole table went silent. But they didn't know. A soldier is never defeated by words. My name is Jamie North, and I am 28 years old. Stepping through the heavy oak door of my family's Beacon Hill brownstone, the warmth of the house felt like a deception. The air was thick with the rich scent of roasted turkey and sage, a smell so tied to Thanksgiving that it almost soothed the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. It was a familiar dread, a feeling I carried into this house every year. Tucked inside my coat pocket, the official letter felt heavy, its crisp edges a silent prayer. Sergeant Jamie North. I had practiced in the mirror, rehearsing how to present this piece of my life so it wouldn't be dismissed as another trivial anecdote. I'd spent my life fighting for a sliver of their approval, and tonight, I hoped, would be different. From the entryway, I saw them gathered in the formal living room. My sister, Clarissa, a brilliant lawyer, was laughing at something my mother, Eleanor, had said. My younger brother, Spencer, a rising star in finance, stood beside them, his arm around his perfect girlfriend, Isabel. Eleanor's face was alight with a pride she reserved exclusively for them, her voice carrying as she praised Clarissa's latest case and Spencer's newest deal. I took a deep breath, my fingers closing around the letter. All I wanted was a single moment to slip in and finally be seen. As we sat down to dinner, the long mahogany table gleamed, set with the family's best silver. The roasted turkey was a picturesque golden brown. The homemade cranberry sauce sat ruby red in a crystal bowl, and the scent of pumpkin pie drifted from the kitchen. It was all perfect, a flawless stage for the ugly drama to come. My mother, Eleanor, raised her sparkling baccarat champagne flute, tapping it gently to command attention. It was time for her annual Thanksgiving speech. "To family," she began, her eyes sweeping over us. She sang the praises of Clarissa's Harvard law degree and toasted Spencer's incredible business acumen. Her words were a warm, golden syrup poured over her two prized children. Then her gaze, as cold and sharp as ice, landed on me. "And of course, there's Jamie," she said, her voice laced with a dismissive sigh. "With her marketing job and her little weekend army hobby." A few polite, strained chuckles echoed around the table. My cheeks burned with shame. A hobby, that's what she called my sworn oath to this country. The freezing winter nights on training exercises, the immense weight of responsibility I carried. In her world of Ivy League credentials and financial portfolios, my service was no more significant than a pottery class. The words stung, but I clung to the letter in my pocket. I had to try. "Mom," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "I was promoted to sergeant." Eleanor placed her wineglass down. The sound was a sharp, dry clack that cut through the room. Then she laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a cold, brittle noise that shattered the warm atmosphere. "Promoted?" she scoffed, her eyes wide with mock disbelief. "To what end, Jamie? So you can waste your life playing in the mud with other failures? I poured a fortune into giving you the best education. And for what? So you could become the embarrassment of this family?" Her voice rose, her composed mask cracking to reveal the ugliness beneath. She was on her feet now, leaning over the table, her face twisted. "You ungrateful child, you are a stain on this family. Get out." The words hung in the air, vibrating with venom. Then a deafening silence fell. It was absolute. My father, Harrison, bowed his head, his eyes fixed on the turkey on his plate. Clarissa and Spencer stared blankly at the white linen tablecloth, their faces perfectly neutral, their complicity screaming louder than any accusation. Not one of them met my gaze, not one of them said a word. I didn't cry. Rage and pain had seared my tear ducts shut. In that moment, my military training took over. My spine, of its own accord, straightened. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished wood, and stood. I looked at each of them one by one, letting my eyes linger on their silent, averted faces. Their quiet cowardice was a betrayal sharper than my mother's brutal words. I didn't need to say anything else. Without a sound, I turned and walked away from the table. I walked past the scent of the feast I would not eat, past the faint notes of jazz music, and out of the heavy oak door. I left behind a family that was rotten to its core, a house built on hypocrisy. The cold, crisp November air of Boston hit my face, a stark contrast to the suffocating warmth inside. For the first time, the chilling bite of the night felt more like a welcoming embrace than the home I had just been cast out of. Eleanor's words echoed in my head, a vicious, repeating loop. But underneath them, a deeper, more painful question began to form. Why? Why is it always me? Curled up on the worn-out sofa in my best friend Maya's apartment, the lingering question, why me, hung in the quiet air, a ghost in the room. The initial shock from Thanksgiving had bled away, leaving behind the familiar hollow ache of a wound that never truly heals. My mind, desperate for an answer, drifted back through the years, searching through a lifetime of carefully filed away slights, looking for the start of the fracture, the origin of my otherness. It settled on the year I turned 16. I had won first place in a statewide art competition. It wasn't a small school fair, it was a significant, juried event, and the achievement felt like a sunburst in my chest. I remember the entire walk home from the gallery, clutching the heavy, sparkling crystal trophy in my hands. It was substantial, real. My heart hammered against my ribs with a pure, unadulterated excitement. I couldn't wait to show them, to finally present an accomplishment so tangible, so validated by the outside world, that they couldn't possibly ignore or diminish it. I found them in the living room. I held it out. My mother looked at the trophy, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before her face settled into its customary polite, distant smile. Her words, spoken with a soft, dismissive warmth that was more cutting than any shout, still echo in my mind. "What a sweet hobby, darling," she'd said, patting my arm as if I were a child, showing her a macaroni necklace. "But let's focus on your SATs now. That's your future." A hobby. All those late nights hunched over a drawing board, the passion I poured into every single line, the way I saw the world in shapes and shadows. All of it reduced to a quaint, childish pastime. A few weeks later, my heart sank into the pit of my stomach. I was looking for an old box in the basement when I saw it. There, sitting beside a stack of old yellowing newspapers destined for recycling, was my trophy. It wasn't broken or even chipped. It was simply discarded, placed among the trash, deemed unworthy of a space in our home. It was a clear, silent message. You and the things you love do not belong here. The memories kept coming, each one another layer of proof. I was 18, and the thin envelope from Yale, Clarissa's alma mater, had arrived. The rejection letter felt like a public declaration of my failure. It was in the shadow of that disappointment that I made a life-altering decision. I enlisted in the Army National Guard. I craved the structure, the discipline, the unwavering sense of purpose and pride that was so glaringly absent in my own home. It felt like a noble path, a way to serve something larger than the suffocating materialistic expectations of the Vance family. I can still picture my mother's face as I showed her the enlistment letter. She wasn't angry, which somehow felt infinitely worse. Her expression was one of profound, weary pity, as if she were looking at a wounded animal she didn't know how to fix. "Oh, Jamie," she sighed, her voice dripping with a condescending sorrow that made my skin crawl. "Is this what you choose when you can't compete with your siblings? You're throwing your life away on this game." My father, ever the conflict avoider, had merely mumbled something about life experience before quickly excusing himself from the room. They saw my oath to my country not as a commitment, but as a consolation prize. It was the last resort for the daughter who couldn't keep up. A death sentence for my future, as my mother later called it. Amidst these cold, sharp memories, one warm image surfaced, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. My grandfather, a decorated Marine Corps veteran. He was the only one who ever truly saw all the parts of me and thought they fit together perfectly. When I was a little girl, he'd take me to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, spending hours with me in front of the Monets and the Sargents. He never once criticized my childish crayon and marker drawings. Instead, he'd study them with a serious, thoughtful expression and say, with a gravelly voice, "This one's got the eye of an artist and the heart of a warrior." He saw no conflict between the two. The day I enlisted, he was the one who drove me to the recruitment station. Before I went inside, he pressed his old, worn challenge coin into my palm. The metal was cool and heavy against my skin, a solid anchor. He leaned in and whispered, his voice rough with an emotion the rest of my family never showed me. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that you're not good enough. Courage comes in many forms, Jamie, and yours is one of the rarest." He passed away 2 years ago, taking with him the only real, unconditional validation I had ever known. His absence was a constant, aching void. My thoughts snapped back to the present. I was in Maya's living room, the city lights of Boston twinkling outside her window like distant, unconcerned stars. She had quietly placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in my hands and draped a warm, heavy blanket over my shoulders. She didn't offer platitudes or easy reassurances. She just sat with me in the silence for a long time, before looking at me, her expression firm and unwavering. "They don't deserve you, Jamie," she said, her voice cutting through my haze of memories with absolute certainty. And in that moment, hearing that simple truth from someone else, I finally understood the devastating reality. The Thanksgiving dinner wasn't an isolated incident. It was the explosive, inevitable climax of a 28-year war of attrition. A war I was always destined to lose, because the rules were written by them, for them. I hadn't just been kicked out of my home. I'd been in a prison my entire life, and my jailer had, in her blinding rage, unknowingly handed me the key. The revelation was liberating, but it was also terrifying, a freefall into an unknown world. But what was I supposed to do with this sudden, painful freedom? My new life began in a small third-floor studio apartment in Allston. The neighborhood pulsed with a vibrant, gritty energy from the students and artists who called it home, a world away from the stately, suffocating silence of Beacon Hill. The move was a blur of rented U-Haul trucks and the hollow echo of my own footsteps in an empty room that smelled of old paint and someone else's life. Those first few nights were the hardest, The profound, unyielding silence of my new reality was somehow louder and more piercing than my mother's screams had ever been. It was the crushing sound of being utterly, completely untethered. To keep the ghosts of my own thoughts at bay, I threw myself into my work at the marketing firm with a ferocious, desperate energy. I became a machine of productivity. I volunteered for every extra project, took on the clients no one else wanted, and stayed late every night, long after the office had emptied. The city lights would glitter outside my window as I hunched over my desk, a welcome distraction. I filled my weekends with freelance gigs, typing away until my eyes burned. My brain was a constant, welcome buzz of deadlines and client feedback, a shield of noise that drowned out the more painful whispers of memory. My body paid the price. My diet consisted of greasy takeout from the cheap Thai place down the street and sodium-rich instant ramen noodles that I'd eat standing over the sink. I lost a few pounds I couldn't afford to lose, and the dark, bruised-looking circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures. This was the true cost of freedom. It wasn't a soaring, triumphant feeling. It was a stark, cold, and deeply lonely currency, paid for with exhaustion and isolation. Then came Christmas. The first real snow of the season fell, blanketing Boston in a soft, quiet white that seemed to muffle the entire world. I found myself aimlessly scrolling through social media on my phone, a self-destructive impulse I couldn't resist. And there it was, a photo album titled Vance Family Christmas Eve, posted by Clarissa. The first picture showed the towering Fraser fir, sparkling with 1,000 tiny lights, reaching up to the high ceiling of the Beacon Hill brownstone. I saw the mountain of brightly wrapped presents, the gleam of silver, and the radiant smiles on their faces. My mother, in a festive red dress, was raising a glass. My father stood beside her, his arm around her. Clarissa, Spencer, and Isabel looked perfect. The caption read, "Nothing better than being with the ones who matter most." No one was missing, no one had called. That night, I sat alone on the floor of my apartment, a single lamp casting a lonely pool of light on the bare hardwood. My Christmas dinner was a packet of chicken-flavored ramen, its steam fogging up the cold window pane as I stared out into the darkness. The festive streetlights outside blurred as my eyes finally filled with tears. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of a brutal, final acceptance. To them, I had truly vanished. I was a ghost they had successfully exorcised from their pristine lives. But as the tears dried on my cheeks, a strange, unexpected sense of relief washed over me. The exhausting performance was over. I no longer had to play the part of someone I wasn't, contorting myself to fit into a role I was never meant for. In my weakest moments, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight, my military training became my salvation. It was the unshakable bedrock upon which I started to rebuild my life. Every morning, no matter how exhausted I felt, my internal drill sergeant had me up at 0500. I'd pull on my running shoes and head out into the pre-dawn chill for a run along the Charles River. The freezing air would burn my lungs, a sharp, cleansing pain that cleared my mind. Back in my apartment, I would clean with meticulous precision, making my bed with crisp, tight hospital corners, just like in basic training. These small, structured acts were my anchors in a sea of chaos. They gave me a tangible sense of control when everything else felt like it was spinning away from me. During those early morning runs, I started listening to podcasts. I stumbled upon Brené Brown, and her words about vulnerability and courage hit me like a lightning bolt. She spoke of the arena, of daring greatly of the credit belonging to the person in the fight. Vulnerability is not weakness, her voice said through my headphones. A calm, steady presence. It's our greatest measure of courage. It reframed my entire experience. I wasn't weak for feeling hurt. I was in the arena. I was covered in dust and blood, maybe getting my ass kicked, but I was still standing. I was still fighting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things started to shift. At work, an opportunity arose with a notoriously difficult client. Drawing on my new resolve, I pitched a bold, unconventional marketing campaign. My boss was skeptical, his brow furrowed with doubt. But something in my presentation, a new, hard-won confidence, convinced him to give me a chance. I poured everything into it. I worked sleepless nights, channeling not just my strategic thinking, but also the artistic creativity my family had tried so hard to stamp out. For the first time, I blended logic and art, strategy and soul, without apology. And it worked. The campaign was a phenomenal success. The day the congratulatory email from the client's CEO landed in my inbox, forwarded by my own boss with a simple, "Incredible work, Jamie," I had to excuse myself. I walked into the sterile quiet of the office restroom, locked the stall door, and slid down to the cool tile floor. And I cried, not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming, triumphant joy. This was the first piece of recognition I had earned entirely on my own, without the Vance name or their charity. It was a small victory, but it was mine. I wonder, have you ever had a moment like that? A small win that felt like it changed everything? It was a tiny spark, but in the profound darkness I had been living in, it felt as bright and as warm as the sun. Maya was more than just the person who gave me a place to stay in those first few numb days. She was my anchor. She was the one constant in the wreckage of my old life. When she saw me sinking into the silent, gray quicksand of my own sorrow, she would physically pull me out of the apartment, insisting we walk along the esplanade, even in the biting wind. When I couldn't eat, she'd show up with a pint of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream, my favorite, and sit with me in comfortable silence. She listened to me retell the same old stories of hurt and humiliation, a broken record of my past, never once showing a flicker of judgment or impatience. One evening, as I was spiraling, blaming myself for not being smarter, stronger, or different, she put her hands firmly on my shoulders, forcing me to meet her gaze. Her eyes were clear and resolute. "Jamie, stop," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This is not on you. You were part of a rotten system that was designed for you to fail. You are not the one who needs to change." Her words were like a compass. They didn't magically heal the wound, but they gave me a true north, a direction to face whenever I got lost in the blinding fog of self-doubt. On her advice, I found Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Her office was a warm, quiet sanctuary overlooking the Boston Public Garden. The soft chairs, the scent of lavender, and the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner all seemed designed to soothe. It was there, in that safe space, that I first heard the terms that would give a name to my entire existence: scapegoat and golden child. Dr. Shaw explained with a calm empathy that was profoundly healing that I had been unknowingly cast in the role of the family scapegoat. I was the designated carrier for all their unprocessed anger, their disappointments, their insecurities. Clarissa and Spencer were the golden children, the vessels for all their hopes and ambitions. Every session with her felt like an archaeological dig into my own soul. We carefully unearthed years of buried pain, layer by painful layer. She helped me understand that my suffering was real, it was valid, and it had a name. It wasn't just in my head. Dr. Shaw gave me the tools to start rebuilding my shattered self-worth, beginning with the simple, revolutionary act of acknowledging what I had endured. The world began to open up in other ways too. One brisk Saturday afternoon, seeking refuge from my own apartment, I was sketching in a small, sunlit coffee shop in Cambridge. I was lost in the lines on the page when a man at the next table caught my eye. He was looking at my sketchbook, not with a quick, polite glance, but with genuine curiosity. He introduced himself as Leo Sterling, an architect. He didn't offer empty praise. Instead, he asked about my process. He wanted to know the meaning behind the sharp, angular lines, the emotion I was trying to convey in the shadowed spaces. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from art to architecture to the strange and winding paths of life. For the first time with someone new, I didn't edit my story. I told him about my marketing job, about my commitment to the Guard, and even about the deep, painful rifts with my family. He just listened. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer advice. He simply listened, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering empathy. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that struck me to my very core. "It sounds to me," he said softly, "like you're the only one in your family who dared to be authentic." That sentence, that unconditional acceptance of my truth, was the very thing I had spent my entire life starving for. It was a glass of water after a lifetime in the desert. Slowly, almost without me realizing it, a new family began to form around me. It wasn't one bound by blood or obligation, but by choice and mutual respect. There was Maya, my steadfast, loyal anchor. There was Dr. Shaw, my wise and gentle guide. And now there was Leo, who brought with him a kind of calm, healthy love I had never known was possible. They were my people, a family of my own choosing, who had also chosen me. They celebrated the woman I was in all my complexity, the disciplined sergeant and the sensitive artist. They didn't ask me to be smaller, quieter, or different. They just asked me to be me. Lying in bed one night, the familiar silence of my apartment no longer felt like a threat. It felt like peace. For the first time in my 28 years, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because of a last name or a bloodline, but because of genuine understanding and true appreciation. My life had finally found a peaceful, steady rhythm. My work was fulfilling, my small apartment felt like a true home, and my relationship with Leo was growing deeper and more wonderful every day. I was building a life on my own terms, a life of quiet joy. And then the past came calling. It was a Tuesday evening. Leo and I were cooking dinner together, laughing as I tried to explain the difference between two marketing concepts. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello?" A hesitant, familiar voice answered. "Jamie, it's Dad." My heart gave a painful thud against my ribs. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in nearly 6 months. For a single, foolish second, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe he was calling to check in. Maybe he was sorry. That hope died almost instantly. His voice was awkward, strained. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't mention my job or ask about my health. He cleared his throat and got straight to the point. "Jamie, listen, your mother, she hasn't been well." The classic opening. "Spencer and Isabel are having their engagement party soon, and your mother wants you to be there. She wants you to come home." The carefully chosen words, "She isn't well, she wants you home," were a transparent manipulation. I could hear the invisible strings in every syllable. This wasn't an invitation, it was a summons, artfully disguised as a plea for familial harmony. It wasn't about me, it was about what they needed from me. A few days later, my brother Spencer asked to meet. We met at a neutral coffee shop near the Boston Common, a place with no history for us. He looked exhausted, the skin under his eyes puffy and dark. He fidgeted with his coffee cup, avoiding my gaze. "You should come, Jamie," he said, his voice low. "Just for one night, for me, for Isabel. Mom is making everything difficult." I remembered the little boy who used to be my closest friend, my partner in crime, before the family roles became so rigidly defined. I looked at the man he had become, a man now tasked with managing our mother's moods. "Spencer, let me ask you something honestly," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Do you want me there because you miss me, or because you want Mom to stop making your life difficult?" He looked down, his shoulders slumping. He couldn't answer. And in his silence, I had my answer. He wasn't there for me. He was there for himself. He was the golden child, still willing to sacrifice the family scapegoat on the altar of his own peace and quiet, just to keep the dysfunctional system running smoothly. The realization left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. That night, I told Leo everything. He listened patiently, his presence a warm, solid comfort. He didn't tell me what to do or what to think. He simply held me and asked one simple, clarifying question. "Will going back bring you peace, Jamie?" His question cut through all the noise, all the guilt and obligation. It went straight to the heart of the matter. Going back wasn't about healing. It was about walking willingly back into the same old trap, volunteering to wear the chains of judgment and criticism once more. It was about sacrificing my hard-won peace for their temporary comfort. Later, as if the universe wanted to give me one more sign, a text message lit up my phone. It was from Isabel, Spencer's fiancée. "Jamie, I know this is none of my business, but I see how Eleanor treats people. Please don't come if you don't want to. Your peace of mind is the most important thing." That simple act of validation from a near stranger, someone with an outside perspective, held more power and meant more to me than any hollow appeal to family ever could. My polite refusal, communicated through Spencer, was not well received. Eleanor didn't call me to yell. She did something far worse. She escalated. She bypassed me entirely and went straight for the foundation of my new life. She called the commanding officer of my National Guard unit. My CO called me later that day, his voice a mixture of professional concern and confusion. "Sergeant North," he began, "I received a call today from a woman identifying herself as your mother, Eleanor Vance." A cold dread snaked its way up my spine. "She claimed to be a worried mother," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "She made some allegations that you were having psychological issues, that you were unstable. She requested that the unit intervene to get you to return home to your family." I listened, a silent, ice-cold fury building inside me. My mother wasn't just trying to control my personal life anymore. She was actively trying to sabotage my career. She was willing to destroy my reputation, my honor, and the one thing in my life I had built entirely for myself, by myself. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was an act of war. After the call with my commanding officer, I didn't panic. The simmering rage that had been building for months didn't explode into a chaotic tantrum. It crystallized. It became a cold, hard, diamond-sharp clarity that cut through all the residual fear and confusion. For the first time, I felt a singular, unshakable purpose. My first action was to calmly and professionally explain the long and sordid history of my family's behavior to my CO. I laid out the pattern of manipulation and belittlement. He listened, he understood, and he assured me of his full support and trust, documenting the incident as a civilian harassment attempt. The institution I had sworn to serve trusted me. The one I was born into did not. That contrast solidified everything. That evening, the air in my apartment was still and charged with unspoken tension. I sat down on the sofa across from Leo. The usual warmth and easy laughter between us was replaced by a quiet, shared gravity. He knew this was a turning point. I looked at him, my resolve hardening with every steady beat of my heart. "I'm going to call her," I said, my voice even and low. "And I need you to do something for me. I need you to record this call." Leo simply nodded, his expression serious and unwavering. There was no hesitation, no questioning my judgment. He just pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed the red button, the small digital timer beginning its silent count. He placed the phone on the coffee table between us, a silent electronic witness. I took a deep, deliberate breath. It wasn't a breath to calm my nerves or quell a flutter of fear. It was a breath to focus my energy, to gather every ounce of strength I had forged in fire and solitude. In that moment, I wasn't Jamie, the scared and hurt daughter, anymore. I was Sergeant North of the United States Army National Guard, and I was about to establish a new chain of command. I dialed her number from memory. She picked up on the second ring, her voice dripping with a smug, cloying triumph that made my stomach turn. "Ah, so you finally decided to call your mother. I knew you would. They got in touch, didn't they?" I didn't let her set the tone. I didn't engage with her premise or her victory lap. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion, as if I were delivering a formal after-action report. "Eleanor." It was the first time in my life I had ever addressed her by her first name. The silence on the other end of the line was electric, a sudden void where her smugness used to be. I had her full, undivided attention. "You called my commanding officer," I stated, not as a question, but as the first item in a list of charges. "You slandered my name. You attempted to sabotage my career with lies about my mental stability. That action crossed every conceivable line of human decency." The silence stretched for another second, a beat of pure shock. Then the inevitable explosion. "How dare you use that name with me?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, with the fury of a queen whose authority had just been challenged. "I did what I did because I'm trying to help you. You're out of control." "No," I cut her off, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice slicing through her hysteria. "You did that because you are no longer able to control me. So you will listen to me now, and you will listen very carefully. From this moment forward, you have no authority in my life. You have no say. You will not call me. You will not text me. You will not show up at my place of work. And you will have no further contact with my military unit or any of my associates. If you or anyone else from this family acting on your behalf violate these clearly established terms, I will consider it an act of harassment, and I will take immediate legal action. Is that understood?" I could hear her ragged, desperate gasps for air on the other end of the line. She was sputtering, the sound of a tyrant losing her grip, her primary weapon, my fear of her, rendered useless. You're threatening your own mother," she finally managed to stammer. Every word I spoke next was deliberate, etched with the finality of a judge's sentence. I leaned forward slightly. "This is not a threat, Eleanor. This is a promise." I let the words hang in the air for a beat, letting their full weight land. "You spent 28 years creating a monster with your cruelty, your narcissism, and your contempt. Now you get to face her. I hope you have a lovely engagement party." I ended the call before she could utter another word, my thumb pressing the screen with a definitive, satisfying finality. The silence that filled the room was absolute, profound. I let out a long, slow breath, a single exhalation that felt like it carried the weight of my entire life with it. 28 years of trying, of hoping, of being crushed, gone, released. I looked up at Leo. His eyes weren't filled with pity, the look I had grown so accustomed to my entire life. They were wide with a raw, profound admiration. He reached over and silently stopped the recording. I hadn't just drawn a line in the sand. I had built a fortress wall, high and impenetrable, right through the center of my life. And I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones, that this wasn't the end. The war had just begun. I wasted no time. The declaration of war had been made, and now it was time to prepare the battlefield. My small apartment transformed into a makeshift war room. With Elio as my trusted second-in-command, we worked with a quiet, focused intensity. I remembered a line from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a book my grandfather had insisted I read. "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles." My family's greatest weakness was their obsession with their public image, their perfect facade. My greatest strength was the truth. On my laptop, I created a new encrypted folder titled simply Operation Freedom. This was my arsenal. My weapons weren't rifles and ammunition, but hard, undeniable facts. I spent hours scanning documents, the hum of the machine, a steady rhythm in the quiet room. I scanned my letter of promotion to sergeant, every military commendation I had ever received, every glowing email from a satisfied marketing client, and even high-resolution photos of my best artwork. This was the dossier of my worth, the proof of a life they had refused to see. Next, I created a second folder, Evidence of Manipulation. Into this went the audio file of my phone call with Eleanor. I transcribed the text messages from my father and Spencer, their words of veiled coercion, now stark and incriminating on the page. I wrote a detailed chronological account of past events, from the discarded trophy to the verbal abuse at Thanksgiving. Each piece of evidence was a brick, and with them, I was building an impenetrable fortress around my new life. A few nights later, an unexpected knock came at my door. My heart leaped into my throat. I peered through the peephole. It was Spencer. He looked even worse than he had at the coffee shop, his face pale and drawn, his eyes hollowed out with exhaustion and something that looked like shame. I opened the door. "You were right," he whispered, his voice barely audible. He couldn't meet my eyes. "After you hung up, Mom had a meltdown, a full-blown narcissistic rage. She blamed Isabel, said she had poisoned my mind against the family. Isabel couldn't take it anymore. She packed a bag and left." The news hit me, but I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for the collateral damage. Then he held out a small silver USB drive. "This is for you," he said. "Dad gave these to me for safekeeping a while ago. They're the statements for the trust funds our grandfather left for the three of us. I think you should look at yours, specifically the withdrawals over the last few years." He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a misery I'd never seen in him before. "I'm sorry, Jamie," he choked out, "for everything." Before I could respond, he turned and walked quickly down the hall, disappearing down the stairwell. My hands were trembling slightly as I closed the door. Leo and I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. We opened the files. A series of PDF bank statements appeared on the screen, a neat column of dates and numbers. And those numbers told a story far more brutal and calculated than any verbal insult. For the last 10 years, ever since I had turned 18, my trust fund, my inheritance from the one person who truly believed in me, had been systematically drained. Large, regular withdrawals were made by Eleanor, listed under vague justifications like educational expenses or living support. But the dates and amounts were a perfect, sickening match for other events. A $20,000 withdrawal coincided exactly with the down payment Spencer needed for his first investment property. Another $10,000 withdrawal matched the month Clarissa bought herself a lavish designer wardrobe for her new law firm. Smaller, regular sums vanished every month, likely subsidizing their country club memberships and expensive dinners. They had been embezzling from me. They had stolen my inheritance to fund the lives of the golden children, all while calling me a failure and a drain on their resources. The feeling of betrayal was so intense it was suffocating. This wasn't just emotional abuse anymore. This was a crime. This new, undeniable evidence changed everything. My plan shifted from defense to offense. This was no longer just a private family matter to be handled with boundaries. This was a legal and financial reckoning. I opened a new email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my tone no longer that of a hurt daughter, but of a cold, detached lawyer. I addressed it to my parents, Clarissa and Spencer. The subject line was simple: financial reconciliation. In the body of the email, I attached 2 files, the complete audio recording of my call with Eleanor and the damning trust fund statements with the suspicious withdrawals highlighted in red. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't appeal to emotion. I made one clear, non-negotiable demand: the full and complete reimbursement of all funds taken from my account with compound interest to be deposited within 30 business days. Failure to comply, I wrote, would result in the entire dossier being handed over to my attorney for immediate legal proceedings. I took one last look at the words on the screen. Then, with a steady hand, I clicked send. The small apartment was silent. The bomb had been dropped. My email detonated a seismic shockwave through the Vance family's carefully constructed world. It was a digital bomb, and the fallout was immediate. Less than an hour after I hit send, my phone rang. It was my father, his voice, usually so full of booming authority, now thin and laced with a panicked tremor. He didn't yell or accuse. He stumbled over his words, pleading for a family meeting to clear the air and discuss this unfortunate situation. "I'll agree to a meeting," I told him, my voice preternaturally calm and measured, a stark contrast to his agitation. "But it will be on my terms. It will take place at a neutral location of my choosing at a time I set, and Leo will be present as my support." It was a non-negotiable condition. The days of me walking into their lion's den alone, outnumbered and emotionally ambushed, were over. He sputtered for a moment, clearly unaccustomed to being dictated to, but the desperation in his voice gave him away. He reluctantly agreed. I remembered a core principle from my military training: always control the terrain. Their power, their very identity, was intrinsically linked to the opulent splendor of their Beacon Hill brownstone. I wasn't going to fight them on their home turf. I rented a sterile, anonymous conference room in a downtown office building for 1 hour. It was a soulless space with a long scratched table, uncomfortable mesh chairs, and harsh humming fluorescent lighting. There was no family history in those walls, no ghosts of my childhood to haunt me. It was a blank slate. Leo and I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose my seat at the head of the table, a position of authority, and placed a single, unassuming manila folder in front of me. When the Vance family walked in, they looked utterly out of place, like aristocrats who had taken a wrong turn into a government building. Stripped of the backdrop of their wealth and status, they seemed smaller, their expensive clothes looking more like ill-fitting costumes. The air of invincibility they usually wore had evaporated, replaced by a nervous, palpable tension. For the first time in my life, they were on my territory. I had complete control. My father, Harrison, ever the appeaser, started the proceedings, attempting to smooth things over with his usual empty, infuriating platitudes. "Now, Jamie, I'm sure this is all just a terrible misunderstanding," he began, forcing a weak, placating smile. "We're a family. We can work through anything if we just talk." Before I could respond, Clarissa jumped in, her voice sharp with the indignation of the privileged. She went on the attack. "A misunderstanding? Dad, she's trying to extort us. After everything this family has given you. How ungrateful can you be? This is nothing but pure greed, Jamie." Her accusations, which once would have pierced me to the core, now felt hollow and absurd. They were firing blanks into reinforced steel. I didn't even flinch. I simply tapped a finger on the manila folder in front of me. The cold, hard evidence inside was louder and more powerful than her tired insults. Across the table, Eleanor was eerily silent. Her face was a pale, tight mask of contained fury and dawning fear. Her eyes, usually so sharp and critical, darted between me and the folder. She knew in that moment that she had lost complete control. Her usual tactics, the shouting, the belittling, the public shaming, were useless here. So she resorted to her final weapon, the one she deployed when all else failed: tears. Her shoulders began to shake, and she produced a theatrical, heaving sob. "Jamie, how could you do this to your own mother?" she cried, her voice thick with manufactured pain. "After all I've done for you, I only ever wanted what was best." But this time the performance fell flat. The audience was no longer captive. It was Spencer who broke the spell. He had been silent since they arrived, his gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. Now he looked up, his face etched with a profound, soul-deep weariness. "Stop, Mom," he said, his voice trembling but clear, cutting through her fake sobs with surgical precision. "Just stop it." He turned his gaze from her to our father and Clarissa, his eyes holding a new, painful clarity. His next words landed like hammer blows in the silent room. "We all know," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke the truth aloud. "We all know where that money came from. We knew, and we kept quiet. We took it. We benefited from it while Jamie was getting by on her own. She's not wrong. We are." The confession sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was the final, fatal puncture to the bloated balloon of my family's hypocrisy. Clarissa's mouth fell open. She was stunned into a rare, slack-jawed silence. My father, the great enabler, slumped in his chair and buried his face in his hands, a portrait of pathetic, overdue defeat. Eleanor just stared at Spencer, her eyes wide with the horror of the ultimate betrayal. Her golden child had just confessed to the crime in front of witnesses. I let the heavy, damning silence hang in the air for a full minute, letting them stew in the truth they had ignored for a decade. Then I slowly rose to my feet, my movements deliberate and controlled. "I don't need your apologies," I said, my voice steady and clear. "They're worthless to me. I just want what is legally mine. The money will be returned to my account in full, with compound interest as outlined in my email. But I have one additional, non-negotiable condition." 4 pairs of broken, defeated eyes lifted to meet mine. "From this day forward, my name will not be mentioned in your conversations. To your friends, to society, to each other. I no longer exist in the Vance family. You will grant me the peace of being forgotten by you. You will leave me alone." I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a legally binding non-disclosure agreement, drafted by my lawyer. It stipulates that you will not discuss me, my life, or this settlement with any third party. Ever. You will all sign it." I looked at each of their shattered faces. This was the final act. I wasn't just getting my money back. I was taking my entire life back. Within 30 days, the full amount, plus interest, was wired to my bank account. The non-disclosure agreement arrived via courier, signed by all of them. The war was over. I had won. But instead of the pure, exhilarating triumph I had expected, a strange and profound emptiness settled over me. It was a disorienting quiet after a lifetime of noise. For 28 years, I had been fighting a war on 2 fronts, fighting for their attention, and in the end, fighting against their tyranny. Now that the enemy was vanquished and the objective secured, I felt adrift, unsure of my new purpose. One night, as I was staring blankly at the wall of my apartment, Leo wrapped his arms around me from behind. He held me for a long moment, then spoke softly into my ear. "You're grieving, Jamie," he said. "You're grieving the family you should have had." He was right. I hadn't just severed a toxic relationship. I had performed an amputation on my own life. I had buried a part of my past, a deep-seated childish hope that one day they might finally see me. The pain of that loss was a dull, persistent ache, deeper and more complicated than I could have ever imagined. It was the sorrow of finally accepting that the home you've been trying to get back into was never really your home at all. A week later, my father called. This time, there was no panic in his voice, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He asked to meet me at a park bench along the Charles River, the very spot where he had taught me to ride a bicycle. 2 decades ago, the memory felt like it belonged to another lifetime, to another girl. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the gray water flow toward the harbor as a cold wind whipped around us. He didn't look at me, just stared out at the horizon. "I'm sorry," he finally said. The 2 words I had never once heard from him. They sounded foreign and clumsy coming from his lips. "I was a coward, Jamie," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I chose a false peace over protecting my own daughter. I let Eleanor's fears and her darkness consume our entire family. I stood by and did nothing." He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. He wasn't asking me to come back. He was simply stating a fact, a confession into the cold Boston air. He finally looked at me, a flicker of something new in his tired eyes. "I am so proud of the woman you've become." We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there, 2 strangers connected by a shared broken past. But it was a start, a small, fragile, and honest beginning. A different kind of beginning was happening with Spencer. He and Isabel invited me to their new apartment for coffee. It was surprisingly easy, with none of the old, strained tension. We spoke like adults, like peers. Spencer told me, haltingly at first, that he had started seeing a therapist to learn how to untangle himself from our mother's influence, to find his own voice. Isabel, who had since reconciled with him, talked about her fears and her hopes for raising their own children in a healthy, loving environment, free from the toxic patterns of the past. As I was leaving, Isabel took my hand in both of hers. "You broke the cycle, Jamie," she said, her eyes shining with genuine gratitude. "You gave us a chance to do it differently." I realized then that my relationship with my brother wasn't lost. It was being reborn. It was being rebuilt on a new foundation, not of shared trauma, but of mutual respect and hard-won honesty. That night, back in the solitude of my own apartment, I knew there was one last thing I had to do. I pulled a dusty cardboard box from beneath my bed. It was my own secret museum of pain, filled with artifacts from the Vance family. I took out the old birthday cards with their generic hollow wishes. I looked at the formal family photos where I was always standing slightly on the edge, an awkward afterthought, and at the bottom, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was the crystal art trophy, the one I had secretly rescued from the basement trash all those years ago. I carried the box out to my small balcony and placed the contents into a sturdy metal basin. Then, with a steady hand, I lit a match. I watched as the flame caught the corner of a birthday card, the fire greedily licking at the scripted words. It curled the edges of the photographs, turning smiling faces to black ash. The crystal of the trophy cracked and crazed in the heat. As I watched the last remnants of my old life turn to smoke and disappear into the night sky, I felt no anger, no hatred, only a profound and quiet sense of peace. My grandfather had always loved a verse from Deuteronomy. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. For the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." I had always thought it was about an external power, but I now understood. The strength, the courage, the unwavering presence, it was all inside me. I wasn't burning the past to erase it. I was releasing myself from its weight. This was a cleansing fire, a final act of liberation. A year later, I stood in the middle of a spacious, light-filled studio in Boston's South End. The air was filled with the earthy, creative sense of oil paint, turpentine, and damp clay. Sunlight streamed through the large, industrial windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. This place was my dream made real. This was the Warrior's Easel, a free art workshop I founded for military veterans. Using a portion of the money I had reclaimed, I had built not just a studio, but a sanctuary. I watched as men and women, soldiers who had seen the unimaginable and carried the invisible wounds of war, found a quiet language for their experiences. They worked in concentrated silence, their hands shaping clay on a potter's wheel or moving a brush across a canvas. They were finding a path back to themselves, one stroke of paint at a time. This, I realized, was my true inheritance. I had taken the pain inflicted upon me and transformed it into a safe harbor for others. In the corner, Leo was patiently helping an older Vietnam vet center a lump of clay, his gentle guidance and quiet encouragement a perfect harmony in this space. He was an inseparable part of this new dawn. On Sundays, my new family would gather at the apartment Leo and I now shared. It was an easy, comfortable affair. My father would come, quieter now, more observant, and always carrying a homemade apple pie, his own small, consistent offering of peace. Spencer and Isabel would bring my niece, their beautiful baby girl, and our time was filled with talk, of her first steps and new words. Maya, my forever friend, was always there. Her laughter the constant, a joyful soundtrack of our gatherings. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We talked about the future, about new projects, new hopes, new beginnings. There was no judgment in this room, no competition, no carefully veiled insults. There was only the warm, genuine affection of a family built not on blood, but on the solid foundation of choice, respect, and unconditional love. I would look around the room at these people, at the life we had all built together, and my heart would swell with a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence. This was family. This was home. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still thought of Eleanor and Clarissa. That connection remained frozen in time, a door I had firmly closed and locked. I'd heard through Spencer that they had moved out of Boston, selling the Beacon Hill brownstone, perhaps to escape the whispers and the quiet judgment of a society that prized image above all else. I no longer felt the hot sting of anger when I thought of them, only a distant, melancholy sadness for the women they were, and the mother and sister they could never be. One afternoon, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to mail, but for myself. "Dear Mom," I wrote, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, or because what you did was okay. I forgive you because I deserve to be at peace. I'm letting go of the anger, not for you, but for me." I paused, then added one last line. "I hope that one day you find some peace of your own." I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope with no address, and placed it in a box of things that mattered. My forgiveness didn't need to be received or acknowledged to be real. It was a gift I was finally giving to myself. The final image of my story isn't one of a dramatic, resounding victory, but of a quiet, powerful stillness. It's me, standing in my studio after a workshop. I'm still in my army uniform from a drill weekend, but my hands are smudged with streaks of cadmium yellow and cerulean blue paint. The late afternoon sun streams through the window, illuminating the unfinished canvases around the room. Each one a story, a journey, a soul in the process of healing. I am a sergeant, I am an artist, I am a teacher, I am a friend, I am a partner. I am no longer a scapegoat or a stain on a family name. I am Jamie North. And from the shattered pieces of a cold Thanksgiving night, I have built my own damn dawn. My life now is a work of art. That was my story, my journey from a cold Thanksgiving night to a self-made dawn. I know I'm not the only one who has walked this path, and your story of resilience matters just as much as mine. In the comments below, I would be honored if you shared one small step you took to build your own dawn, or one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is just starting their journey. If my story resonated with you, and you believe in the power of narratives to heal, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of strength. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not a stain, but a masterpiece in the making.